What's up y'all, Jmaculate here. In today's video, we'll be discussing step sequencing basics on the Sonicware Lofi12XT. The main focus will be how to adjust per step parameters, which is sometimes called parameter locking. It's a basic concept, but it allows you to make very complex adjustments to your sequences and sounds. Alright, let's get to it. Let's start by going over how to edit the parameters of steps you've already recorded into the step sequencer. Each of the steps in your pattern is represented by these numbered buttons. The buttons that are lit up red have step data recorded to them. Let's add some notes to this sequence by holding down a numbered step button, then playing the pad. When the step sequencer reaches the lit up steps, it will play the sound that you have loaded to the track. You can adjust the settings of the recorded steps by holding down the function button, then pressing one of the lit up numbered step buttons. You can also move between the steps that have data recorded on them by pressing the left and right arrows. Okay, let's take a closer look at what's available in the step edit menu. Here we can see basic parameter data for the note on that step. You can select different parameters to adjust by using the up and down arrows. And you can adjust the values of the parameters by turning the B knob. Here's a basic explanation of what these parameters do. Note controls what key is played, like C4, D2, etc. This will affect pitch in poly or mono voice mode, or it will change the slice that is played in slice voice mode. Velocity controls how loud the sound plays. Roll will enable the roll playback mode and lets you choose the frequency of the roll retriggers, like 8th note, 16th note, etc. There's another roll parameter called pressure. This allows you to control the velocity of the note at that step of the roll. The next parameter we'll talk about is off timing. This enables you to keep the note held for a short period longer. The higher you set this to, the longer the note will be held for. And then there's the sweep controls: sweep range, sweep curve, and sweep speed. These controls are the same as what you would see on the S&D page. They let you adjust where a note travels to and how fast it gets there. And there are two other important controls to mention here. The first is the micro timing setting, which you can adjust using the C knob. This will change when the note is triggered depending on what you set the value to. As you increase the value, the note will trigger closer to the next step, and as you decrease the value, the note will trigger closer to the previous step, so you can use this to place notes between the steps, which is very useful for rhythmic arrangements. The last control dimension here is the undo function, which is controlled by using the right auxiliary button. This will restore the selected parameter to the setting it was at when you first entered the step edit menu. And one last note, this is about polyphony. Sometimes there are multiple notes in a single step, like when you play a chord. Let's look at an example. The first step only has parameters for the first note. But when we select the next red step button, the controls for the other note I played appear beneath it. Same with the next red step, which has controls for the 3 notes, and the one after, which has controls for 4 notes. A quick way to estimate how many notes are recorded to a step is to enter the step edit menu, then press the up arrow. This will take you to the last parameter you can edit. The parameters are numbered, and there are generally 7 or 8 parameters per note. So if you see a number close to 16, there are probably 2 notes, and if you see a number close to 30, it probably has 4 notes. There are a few more advanced controls to go over, but first, let's go through a basic use case, changing velocity and micro timing on your rhythm section. I've loaded up a few drums for us to demonstrate this with. Let's start with the snare. I'm going to add a snare on step 5 and step 13 using direct recording. And then I'll adjust the parameters so that these notes are at max velocity. And I'll input one final snare trigger on step 15. I want this to be a ghost note, so I'll decrease the velocity of it to 45, and I'll increase the micro timing percentage so it's 15% past the step. Okay, next let's work with the kick. I'll direct record notes on step 1 and step 9. I'll also add a few ghost notes. The first I'll put on step 8, just before the second main kick. For this note, I'm going to adjust the micro timing so it triggers closer to the note on step 9. Somewhere between 20 and 30% usually works well here. And I'll also decrease the velocity of this note so its levels don't compete with the note on step 9. And I'll add one more kick to step 3. This one I also want to adjust the micro timing so it happens closer to the next step. Let's try 15%. And I'll decrease the velocity a little bit so it sounds different than the kicks on step 1 and step 9. And last up is the hi-hat. This track I generally record in live, so let's see if I can get a good take. To activate live recording, press the record button, then press play. Not bad, but I can definitely tighten it up. Fortunately, I don't have to spend all day trying to record a perfect take, because we can adjust the notes with the step edit menu. I'll listen for hi-hats that sound off, and adjust the micro timing and velocity of those so they fit with the rest of the arrangement. A good way to do this is to cycle through the notes with the right and left keys, and keep an eye out for values that are much different than the rest. First, I'll scan for velocity and make sure that everything is within a 20 or 30 cc range. So if my lowest note is 45, I want my highest note to be 65 or 75. Next, I'll scan for micro timing and make sure the notes are within 10% of one another. Okay, let's go over some more advanced step editing controls. Up until this point, we've only discussed editing parameters that already appear in the step edit menu, but there's a way to add other parameters to that menu through a method called parameter locking. Let's take a look. The basic premise of parameter locking is holding down the step button where you want a parameter to change, then adjusting that parameter while the step button is held down. This will make the numbered step button glow yellow to indicate that it has data on it. It also adds an asterisk to the parameter you changed from whatever page it calls home. Now when you enter the step edit mode by holding function and then selecting that step, you'll see the parameter that you added and the change you made. In this example, I parameter locked this step to have 12-bit mode enabled. 12-bit mode will not be active for all other steps, but when the step sequencer reaches this step, it will be enabled. Then it will be disabled again on the next step. So you're probably wondering, what are all the parameters I can change with this? But I think a better question is, what parameters can't you change with this? Most of the parameters you can edit with the A, B, C, and D knobs can be parameter locked. There are probably hundreds of targets, things like effect controls, modulation parameters, filter controls, and so many others. So just like before, let's talk through a few use cases. One very useful parameter lock target is the sample that the note will play. Normally the note will trigger whatever sample you have assigned to that track, but you can parameter lock a different sample in your sample pool to play on that track instead. Here's an example. I have this open hi-hat sample that I want on my hi-hat track, track 3. But the sample that's loaded to this track is a closed hi-hat. So I'll add a parameter lock to step 11, where I want the open hat to trigger by going to the SND page, then holding down step 11, and while still holding down the step, turning the A knob to select the open hi-hat sample. Now when the step sequencer gets to that point, it will play the open hi-hat. As you can see though, it can be a bit finicky. What I think it's doing here is stopping the playback of the open hi-hat sample we targeted once it gets to step 12. So I'll also add a parameter lock to step 12 to have the open hi-hat sample play. Looks like it's going to require some further fine-tuning. Now what I think the problem is the amp envelope. I have the release set pretty low, so I think the open hi-hat sample isn't playing long enough because the release is low. So I'm going to parameter lock the release to be much higher for these two notes. Looks like that did the trick. But that's a good thing to keep in mind. This sample will inherit all other settings of the track. Levels, delay send, effects, filter, the envelope, and whatever else you might have altered on the track. So you'd have to set additional parameter locks to disable those changes if they don't jive with the other sample that you targeted. It can get a little tedious if you need to adjust a lot of parameters, but it's well worth the effort because you only have 8 tracks to work with, so you can avoid burning an entire track for a single trigger sample like an open hi-hat. Another useful parameter lock target is pitch. This is especially useful for sample chops, since unlike a sample in poly or mono voice mode that you can play chromatically across the keys, the pitch of all the chops will match what you set from the SND waveform page. So you sort of get locked into that pitch, unless you parameter lock it. Here's a basic melodic sample I pulled from a record. The piano tones are great, but since the sample isn't very long, it can get repetitive very quickly. So I can parameter lock some different pitches to construct a more unique arrangement, while still keeping the sample in slice voice mode so I have access to the different chops. Just like before though, you may have to parameter lock multiple steps, otherwise the sample chops will return to the original pitch settings. And one last parameter lock target I'll talk about is on the filter page, filter frequency. One thing I like doing with my rhythm section is adding a low pass filter with a deep frequency to some of the ghost kicks in my arrangement. Just like decreasing the velocity, it gives the sound a different character and further distinguishes those notes from the main kicks. And one thing we haven't talked about so far is how to delete parameter lock data. You can see the parameter lock data from the step edit menu. To delete it, you just have to hold the function button, then press the clear button. Step editing and parameter locks give you immense control over your sequences and sounds, from basic controls like nudging notes and adjusting velocity to complex per-step automations. You can really unlock the potential of this device by using these techniques. Well, that does it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.